What's good, Raider Nation? It's your boy Sanjit back at it with another video. Today we are talking about the Las Vegas Raiders, and essentially we're going to do a mock draft today. 7-round mock draft. I'm not always right. I'm not always the smartest when it comes to these picks. I do want to get into this, man. There's so much news that's come out over the past couple of weeks. We're past the combine. We're past the Senior Bowl, the East-West Shrine, the Hula Bowl. We're past that point. A lot of reports have come out with some of these prospects, and some of these guys are going to really end up falling. But I'm excited to get into this, man, and we're going to talk about it right away. We're going to actually, with the top 5 picks, have Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, Mason Graham, Abdul Carter, and Tetro McMillan off the board. And that's going to put the Raiders in a very interesting spot. Now, I'll be the first to tell you guys, if Mason Graham goes before the Raiders pick, that's a huge win. If Will Campbell ends up going before the Raiders pick, that's another big win for the Raiders. I would not touch either of those guys in the top 10 if I'm drafting, right? I don't think Mason Graham's that good. I don't think his tape comes close to a guy like Jalen Carter or Kalijah Kancey's. So to take him in the top 6 picks, I think would be a huge mistake. And you also don't see a lot of pass rush upside with him, at least right now. Will Campbell, I don't think he's a tackle in the NFL. So, again, if he goes before the Raiders pick, that could be beneficial for the Raiders because that means a guy like Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter could potentially fall to us. Now, you guys obviously see the top 5 guys that go before the Raiders pick. And it's going to put the Raiders in an interesting spot, right? Because you could say, hey, Shedeur Sanders is right there. Let's just take him, right? 6th overall pick. You have Geno Smith. Shedeur Sanders, very similar to Geno Smith. You bring in a guy like Shedeur, he can learn potentially behind Geno, and then eventually down the line, he kind of just takes over for Geno. Or you can go the opposite approach, which is, hey, let's go out there and let's get a wide receiver, or let's get a running back, or let's get an offensive tackle, or let's get a defensive lineman, right? And I would make the argument those are the most important positions right there. You should generally not take any other position besides, even running back, probably aren't going to take down the top 10. But wide receiver, defensive end, tackles, defensive ends, defensive tackles, and then even corner. I think if it's a special corner like Jalen Ramsey, you can potentially take that guy as well. And the Raiders are going to have a couple of different options with this pick, right? Because there's a lot of really good talented players at those positions. If you wanted to get a right tackle, Armin Membaugh is the best tackle in this class, in my opinion. He is on the shorter side, right? He's like 6'3.5", but he does have 34-inch arms, right? Which is long enough, and arms always matter more than the actual height of a guy. You can also take a guy like James Pierce or Mike Green. If you wanted to go edge, Shamar Stewart's another guy if you wanted to go edge. There have been rumors with James Pierce that Pierce is going to end up falling down to round 2 or 3 because he apparently has some anger issues. And that has led to him basically being kicked out when he was at, I think it was Virginia. He got kicked out. Even in high school, he was kicked out of high school. And people say it was because of his anger issues. Mike Green, another guy, right, kind of has some issues as well. Could also end up falling. So if I'm the Las Vegas Raiders, I think pick 6 is very easy. You got to get better playmakers on the offensive side. If Tetro McMillan's there, Travis Hunter's there, you got to consider those 2 guys. I'd probably take Travis Hunter over any of the 3. The third being Ashton Jeanty, but if the other 2 are gone, I would draft Ashton Jeanty, and I would not look back at this pick. I've thought a lot about this pick. I've thought a lot about, does it make sense for the Raiders to take Ashton Jeanty? He's a running back. We all know running backs are very dependent on their offensive line, the scheme that they're in. And this is true, and this is 100% facts, but I would also make the argument, Pete Carroll has done a pretty good job, and he's, in the last, 6 years while he was with the Seahawks, he's drafted 2 running backs high. He took one in the 2nd round, he took one in the 3rd round, essentially in back-to-back drafts. And I think one of the things the Seahawks ended up doing that I think Pete Carroll learned from is when, in 2015, they started investing in their offensive line, right? They brought in Gabe Jackson, I think, in 2018, 2019. But even before they brought him in, Damian Lewis, they drafted him high. He ended up becoming a top 5 guard in the NFL. They went out and they said, hey, let's bring in Jason Peters. Let's draft Charles Cross with the 6th overall pick, right? Abraham Lucas, a 3rd round pick, huge upside, arguably one of the better tackles in the NFL if he's healthy. Pete Carroll started this trend in like 2015 where they started investing in that O-line a little bit. And at some point, they kind of went away from that strategy, and it really hindered them. Right? I would make the argument one of the reasons why Geno Smith had a lot of success his first year and then it kind of started to dip was because the offensive line got worse and worse. And they obviously had some injuries as well, right? They tried making some investments. Didn't really work out, right? They paid Phil Haynes at right guard. That never worked out. He was hurt and out for most of that time. They tried exchanging their center a couple of different times. Never worked out. They allowed Damian Lewis to walk at some point as well. The offensive line just got banged up, right? The starting right tackle is out for 2 years due to a knee injury. One of the things that I think the Raiders are going to do with Pete Carroll as we kind of go forward is they're going to build that offensive line. And I 100% agree with that strategy, and I think it's the best thing that the Raiders can do. I know we brought in Alex Kappa, and that's a low risk, right? It's a 1-year contract. But we also have to realize, the Raiders need to get 2 new guards and a right tackle for the long term. You can't do all that in one draft. It is just not possible to make that type of turnover where 3 of your 5 offensive linemen need to be turned over and you think you can just do that in one. It just doesn't happen, right? Alex Kappa, Dylan Parham's here, right? That'll kind of give you that stopgap for that right guard position. You can upgrade the left guard position in the draft, right? 2nd, 3rd round. And then right tackle, of course, you can kind of figure that out as well. But I think for the Raiders, you draft Ashton Jeanty. He's here for 6, 7, 8 years. You can revamp that offensive line at some point. And I think with Chip Kelly as the coach, Ashton Jeanty just makes a ton of sense. Jeanty, to me, and some people will disagree with this, I think he is a generational running back. Saquon Barkley was generational when he came out of Penn State. I would make the argument Bijan Robinson was the other generational running back. And we've had guys like Christian McCaffrey who really ended up being really, really good as well. But I think coming out of college, they weren't, he wasn't necessarily generational. I think coming out of college, Nick Chubb wasn't generational, right? The way Bijan Robinson, the way Saquon Barkley can change direction, their vision, everything they do is truly elite. I think Ashton Jeanty has that type of upside as well, right? So I think he's a generational running back. I would take him with the 6th overall pick. And then comes their 2nd round pick. Now, here's the strategy that I think the Raiders have to consider. So you can go into this draft and say, we need a wide receiver, we need a running back, we need to figure out the right tackle position, but we don't necessarily have to. We can give DJ Glaze another opportunity. You can say we need to figure out the edge position as well. And I think edge should be a priority for the Raiders. I'm not 100% sold on Tyree Wilson. Obviously, you're going to give him that opportunity. He basically has 2, potentially 3 years, right, to pick up that 5th-year option to prove himself as the edge of the future, but I would not rely on that if I'm the Raiders. And even if he ends up working out, I think having 3 guys that can rotate in at the edge is going to be a smart strategy. I don't think Malcolm Koonce is going to be back with the Raiders after this season. $12 million is already a lot of money. He's going to end up getting north of even $12 million after this season. Someone's going to pay him 16, 17, 18 million. Maybe even higher than that. And I don't think the Raiders are going to be able to pay that. So I'm looking at edge players in this class. This class right here has arguably the deepest edge players that you could potentially get. And just as an example, so obviously you guys will see here. So in terms of edge, you're going to get a couple different guys that go in the 1st round. Donovan Ezriku out of Boston College. Mike Green ends up going. Shamar Stewart ends up going. These are all edge players. Makil Williams ends up getting drafted high. He's an edge player. Jalen Walker, he plays linebacker and edge, but I think he goes in the 1st round based off of being an edge player. Just a bunch of edge players coming off the board, right? And my point in saying that, James Pierce goes 27th. My point in saying that is this edge class is insanely deep. And in the 2nd round, you can still get some superstar caliber edge players, right? And then here's just an example of some of the guys you can get. You can get Nick Scorton potentially in the 2nd round. That would be a crazy get for the Raiders. Some people are saying it's a top 5 pick before the season actually ended up happening. Ended up being done, right? Landon Jackson, phenomenal player. Princely, Melon out of Mississippi, another guy that I really, really absolutely love his tape. Brandon Swinsine out of LSU. JT Tomolo out of Ohio State. Again, the edge class this year is absolutely stacked. And I think you can get a guy that could be a long-term starter for the Raiders in the 2nd round. In fact, this happens every year. There's a bunch of guys that go from like pick 25 through 45, right? Somewhere in between the late 1st to middle of the 2nd round, and they end up being good football players, right? Nolan Smith, Karfalitis, the guy that the Chiefs took, right? These are all guys that are really, really good football players. You can find some of these guys in the early 2nd round. And based off of the guys that are kind of available, Princely's one of the guys I really like. He had a phenomenal Senior Bowl. Landon Jackson, a lot of three down snaps, right? Three defensive linemen down snaps. I think if he plays in more of an NFL scheme, if he goes to Alabama, Ohio State, he ends up being a lot better than what he was at Arkansas from a stat production, right? Nick Scorton. I think Brandon Swinson is the guy I would arguably take over all these other guys. JT Tamalua, 6'5", is an incredible mover. So there's so many options. I'm taking an edge player with pick 37. I would consider taking an interior offensive lineman. But I do think there's going to be a lot of really, really good interior offensive linemen available, even in the next round or two, right? Guys like Donovan Jackson, guys like Wyatt Milliam, right? Both of these guys are going to play guard. Anthony Belton, Charles Grant, right? I would take an edge player if I'm the Las Vegas Raiders because of the fact that you got to replace Malcolm Koonce down the line. And you don't want to bring in a rookie to replace Koonce after he leaves. You want to allow a guy to develop. And I know we have Tyree Wilson, but remember, we got to have three guys at that edge position. Tyree Wilson can also jump inside, so it's another thing to kind of just keep in mind. Between the five guys here, you can't really go wrong with any of them. I'm going to go ahead and go with Landon Jackson. I did a film breakdown on this guy. His cross chop is absolutely nasty. He's a guy who has fine-tuned it. His tape against Will Campbell is really impressive as well. And we do have to realize Arkansas, Kentucky, these are teams that play a lot of three down defensive linemen. So, three defensive linemen versus five offensive linemen, you're not going to have the same type of production, right? Landon Jackson, to me, has huge pass rush upside. He's a guy some people have compared similar to a guy like Maxx Crosby, right? They're high effort. They're really, really good with their movement. I will say Jackson's first step is not as explosive, but you got to keep in mind he's 6'6". He's massive, right? And I think, this isn't a Tyree Wilson situation where Tyree Wilson's first step is noticeably slow. That's not this guy, right? This guy can still move pretty well. Let's go ahead and get into the other positions that I think the Raiders have to really potentially bring in. I think interior defensive line is another position you have to consider being able to bring in. Now, I don't agree with PFF's rankings with some of these guys. Like, for example, Deon Walker, I'd be surprised if he's available at pick 68. If he was, I'd take him. No question asked. But we also need a guard. And again, I don't 100% agree with some of these rankings. I find it hard to believe Anthony Belton will be available at pick 68. It just doesn't make sense to me. But, if I'm the Raiders, I'm taking a guard at this point right here, pick 68. And let's just say Anthony Belton is available. I think Anthony Belton could be a first-round pick. We saw Tyler Smith when he was with Tulsa. He played left tackle at Tulsa. Tyler Smith would just toss people, right? He'd get his hands on guys and he'd just toss them out of there. And he dominated people at Tulsa. And then he went to the Senior Bowl. He played guard and tackle at the Senior Bowl, and he dominated people at the Senior Bowl. Very similarly to the trajectory that Anthony Belton's on, where this guy also went from, NC State. He dominated people there. North Carolina State. He dominated people there. Went from there to basically ends up going to the Senior Bowl, and he dominated the Senior Bowl as well. I find it hard to believe this guy's not going to be taken in the top 45 picks. I wouldn't be surprised if Anthony Belton's the first guard taken in this class. Now, there's some people that think he'll play tackle. He has the frame. He has the arm length. He has everything it takes. I don't know if he has the foot speed to play tackle, but when he gets into the NFL and he plays guard, he's going to be a top 5 guard. Tyler Smith, day one, right? Literally, first preseason game was dominating people. Tyler Smith was arguably already the top 5 guard in that first preseason that he kind of went in. And he's now, I think, the best guard in the NFL. I think Anthony Belton will have that same trajectory. So if Anthony Belton is there with pick 68, I'm drafting him. I don't think he's going to be. I'm pretty sure he's going to be off the board at some point in the top 45 picks. Again, I'd be surprised if he's not. Again, it's similar to like Jackson Powers-Johnson, but Powers-Johnson played center. I think taking a top 5 center versus a top 5 guard, I think top 5 guards get valued higher. I don't think guards in general are valued higher than centers, but I think top 5 guards are going to be generally valued higher than top 5 centers. I hope that makes sense. Then we got pick 108. Now, at this point, I think the Raiders just have to fill out some of what could work for their scheme and system. Right, Chip Kelly, get him his running back, get him his wide receiver. Maybe John Spytek, meets with one of these running backs and really, really likes him, or one of these guards or defensive linemen and really, really likes them. Maybe on the other end, it's Patrick Graham says, hey, I want to get myself one of these corners or safeties. You're going to have to consider those positions for sure if you're the Raiders, right? Safety, defensive backs, right? Corners. If you're the Raiders, you got to look at every single option at this point because, we have Jack Jones. We're not sure if Jack Jones is the future for the Raiders. We've allowed Nate Hobbs to walk at this point. I know we brought in a corner here or there, but I'm not 100% sure if we have the long-term guy on this team to play slot, to play outside. At the same time, we brought in a safety, but our two safeties we have are not coverage-based safeties. They're like tall, lengthy, let us play linebacker, right? Isaiah Paul-Amal is that, right? And, to me, I think the Raiders have to get some coverage guys. And there's some good safeties in this class. Jonas Sankers, one of those guys that's really, really, really good. Same with Billy Bowman Jr. These guys have gotten a lot of hype. The Western Kentucky safety, Upton Stout's another guy people really, really like. There's just so many options, I think, this year. Malachi Moore is another guy. Jordan Hancock, Georgia's Dan Jackson. Dan Jackson's a guy that I absolutely love. Maybe you can get Dan Jackson a little bit later on. We could arguably take a quarterback at this point, right? If Chip Kelly likes Bull Howard enough, you can potentially take him. You can potentially take another running back or tight end. We've heard the rumors that Michael Mayer might end up getting shopped, so I think that's another thing the Raiders just have to kind of keep an eye on. You might need to even consider bringing in a linebacker, right? If Patrick Graham loves one of these guys enough, you want to bring in a linebacker potentially as well. You can get another guard if you like that guy enough. There's just a lot of options for the Raiders at this point. Let's look at some of the wide receivers. I think getting a wide receiver could be huge for the Raiders at this point. One of the guys that really, really shined at the Hula Bowl while I was there was, I believe it was Kobe Hudson. I think he was the guy that was really, really flashing. There's a couple other guys that were at the Hula Bowl as well. Chimry Dikey, I think that's how you say his name, from Florida. He was solid. Efton Chisholm was at the Hula Bowl. He was solid. There's definitely some sleeper wide receivers. Rock Taylor was another guy that was pretty solid. Elijah Badger ended up having a really good first and second day. And he ended up just leaving because he had a really, really good day. And, there's definitely options for the Raiders if they wanted to get a wide receiver. I think if you can't get one of the top 3 wide receivers, I would probably not draft a wide receiver until like round 5, 6, or 7, right? Guys that could kind of develop into that role. I think another position the Raiders could potentially take at this point is a quarterback. But again, does that help you win now? I think D-tackle is another position you got to figure out. We did re-sign Zach Carter. Adam Butler got re-signed as well. And then we have Christian Wilkins under contract. But honestly, how much upside does Zach Carter really have? He doesn't have a ton of pass rush upside. And I think even Adam Butler is here for 3 years. But D-tackles sometimes take 3 years to develop. I think Aeneas Pebbles is arguably the best pass rusher in this class. Junior Tufanu was at the Hula Bowl. He's a very, very, very high character player. Cameron Jackson is a nose, arguably, right? He's kind of similar like Jonathan Hankins. He's a guy that can defend the run, but he has some pass rush upside. So there's definitely some guys. I'm going to, at this point, take a defensive tackle for the Raiders. I think getting a defensive line shored up long-term, getting your interior offensive line fixed, I think it's more important to do that than it is to get a quarterback in the 4th round or a wide receiver in the 5th round. I think figuring out and making sure you have your defensive line, offensive line figured out, to me, that's going to be the biggest thing for the Raiders. Let's go ahead and look at some the guys we have drafted at this point, right? So Ashton Jeanty is a day 1 starter, obviously. Landon Jackson is probably a year 2 starter, right? Assuming Malcolm Koonce. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I think Landon Jackson's tape is better than Tyree Wilson's tape. All right, so let me just state that right away. All right, so Landon Jackson's tape to me is better than Tyree Wilson's tape. Anthony Belton, I think, would be a day 1 starter. He played left tackle in college. Slot him in at left guard. Let it be Jackson Powers Johnson, Anthony Belton, Colton Miller. That right there is the future for the next 5 years. Those guys would, it's Kobe and Shaq right there, right? Those guys would absolutely dominate. Pebbles, he is on the shorter side, so I do think he's going to end up going, fourth, fifth, sixth round, maybe third round. A team really likes his tape. He does have elite pass rush upside, right? Pebbles when he was at the Senior Bowl, he was the best pass rusher. There are guys like Jalen Rivers from Miami who was dominating every defensive lineman. Whenever Pebbles went up against him, or even Gray Zabel, Pebbles beat those guys, right? Like, he has elite pass rush, he has elite movement. He has Jalen Carter type tape, legitly. But he's just on the shorter side. His arm length isn't there, and because of that, he's going to end up falling. Usually, if you're not long enough with your arms, it doesn't translate into the NFL. And teams generally don't draft those guys. It's why we saw Jerzon Newton last year. He was with Illinois, had a phenomenal season. People are like, hey, this guy's a top 5 pick. He ended up going in the second round because his arm length, right? The arms were too short. But his tape was really, really, really good. So I think Pebbles will fall. So if he's there in the fourth round, I would take him. Ja'Cory Crosby-Merritt was at the Hula Bowl. He was the best player on the football field. He got an invite to the Shrine. He won the MVP of the Shrine game as well. So that guy can play. He's a guy I would consider. Even if we already take a running back, double dipping in the running back pool this year, I think makes a lot of sense for the Raiders. Luke Kandra put up 36 bench press reps, arguably one of the strongest players in this class. That guy's built different. I'm telling you guys right now, he was at the Hula Bowl. He's built differently as well. Tyler Barron, elite pass rush upside, Let's take a safety at this point. I think the Raiders need to, or a defensive back, generally speaking. The Raiders got to be able to shore it up, right? Elijah Huzzy is a guy that I really, really, really liked in this class. Adonal Fortune was a late Hula Bowl ad as well. He was pretty solid. Denzel Burke, if he's there, I would take him. Ohio State has a connection to Chip Kelly, although it's not the connection that you would think, but they still have some sort of connection. And I think for the Raiders, you have to figure out that secondary. And we know for a fact the secondary is always the type of position where your system matters a lot. Pete Carroll, Patrick Graham, they are a little bit different. Patrick Graham will take the quicker, smaller, good hips, fluid. Pete Carroll wants the taller, longer, lengthier guys, right? So it's a different scheme and system, but we'll see how it kind of comes together because none of our defensive backs really fit. Eric Stokes does, but the other guys like Jacorian Bennett, Jack Jones, they don't really fit the Pete Carroll scheme. They fit the Patrick Graham scheme. And Patrick Graham's had a lot of success with our corners. Add in Denzel Burke. He was a first round coming in, or projected first round coming into the season. Did not have a good season, really fell off. And maybe that's partly because of the defensive coordinator that changed, I think, like 2 years ago for Ohio State. But I think he has potential. I think he has upside. And at this point, fifth round, I think that's when Patrick Graham's going to figure out that corner or that safety that he ultimately wants, right? I think the Raiders could also double dip at guard. Tackles generally are going to come off the board. Any guy that can play tackle from college to the NFL is generally going to come off the board in the top 2 rounds. You'll get some guys in the 3rd round that are like developmental guys, right? DJ Glaze is like developmental, but he's also like a long-term swing tackle if he doesn't work out as a starter. We saw Brandon Parker kind of be that guy. In like the 5th, 6th round, you're not going to get a starting caliber tackle. It's very rare. Very, very, very rare. But you could get a guard, right? You can get a guy that played tackle in college that transitions to guard. Similar to Anthony Belton. We've already taken Belton. He slotted in as a starting left guard. I think the Raiders can still easily say, hey, let's try bringing in a right guard. Let's try bringing in maybe a developmental tackle, right? A long-term developmental tackle. Now, I don't think Thayer Munford's the guy for the Raiders long-term. A guy that I actually really like is going to be Essa Poole out of Washington State. This is a guy, I've spoke to his agent a couple times. I actually posted a clip of this guy on Twitter, and his agent reached out to me right away, like within 2 hours. And I was like, hey, what are your thoughts on Poole? I represent this guy. What are your thoughts on him? And I tried getting him into the Hula Bowl. It didn't work out. I think he was working out in Oregon at that point, and the Hula Bowl was approaching, wasn't going to be able to make it. But he was a guy who had really good tape, and he was right there. Like, the Hula Bowl director was like, hey, we might bring this kid in if he's at least close enough for us to fly him in and kind of get him here. Essa Poole, I think, has a ton of upside. And I think for the Raiders, this is a guy that has potential to start down the line, right? He had a pretty good East-West shrine, right? He ended up not coming to the Hula Bowl because he was too far, but the East-West took him, right? Like, East-West is higher than the Hula Bowl, which is kind of crazy to think. But I think for the Raiders, again, this is the 6th round. You're not going to necessarily get a day one starter, but you can get a developmental guy. The Buffalo Bills took, I think, Spencer Brown. I believe it was in the 3rd round, maybe 4th round. He was not that good in his first 2 years, but it just clicked for him in year 3. He's one of the best right tackles in the NFL now. Developmental guys, to me, is one of those things you want to get in the later rounds. We'll see what he has as it kind of happens. Now, some people do think the Raiders should still draft the quarterback. Brady Cook's a guy that I like. Really, really like his tape. I think he has potential. This past year was not as good, but I probably wouldn't take a quarterback from the Raiders. I think we have 2 picks left at this point. I would bring in a wide receiver at this point. I think one of the things that happens in the NFL sometimes is teams take wide receivers like in the 4th round. It doesn't ever work out. I would take guys that have upside in like round 5, 6, or 7. We've seen some guys go in like round 7 or be UDFAs, right? The Panthers got a guy that was a UDFA this past season that looks really, really, really good. LeJontay Wester is a guy that I think it was Shedeur Sanders that talked really, really highly of him. I think Will Shepard and Wester can both play X. They just got to develop, and we'll see if they can. I'm going to take Wester with this pick. And then it's going to be the final. We actually have 2 more picks for the Raiders here. Let's take a quarterback. Let's just take Brady Cook. Let's develop him. Let's see what he has, right? I'm not sure how much longer Aiden O'Connell is going to be here. Something tells me because he was Josh McDaniels' pick, I don't think he's going to be here much longer, but we will see what ends up happening. And then with the final pick, let's take a running back. Raheem Sanders. I don't know why he's always available in round 7. He did have an ACL injury. He was actually initially with Arkansas when Dalton Wagner was there, right? Remember the Raiders brought in Dalton Wagner. He made the roster. I think he's still with the Raiders. Don't quote me on that. But Raheem Sanders flashed when I watched his tapes. He tore his ACL and then he transferred to South Carolina this past season. The medicals check out according to the reports, right? So Raheem Sanders is a guy that I would absolutely love for the Raiders. But here you guys have it, man. Let me know what you guys think, man. I think the Raiders would get so much better with these picks. You have a day one starter in Ashton Jeanty. I think Landon Jackson legitimately has better tape than Tyree Wilson. I wouldn't be surprised if Jackson in his rookie year ends up being better than Tyree, right? I'm not sure if Tyree will ever develop. And even Anthony Belton would instantly be the best guard on this team, right? I would find it hard to believe this guy's not going to be an elite guard in the NFL. If not, he might be able to play tackle, right? But I'd probably slot him in that guard right away. Pebbles, huge pass rush upside, will be a productive player. He might not ever be a 3-down player because of that run defense, but he'll be productive, right? And I think for the Raiders, think Adam Butler, right? Pebbles, Butler took some time and developed into a good player. Pebbles can kind of hit that trajectory as well. Denzel Burke, if Patrick Graham loves him, why not? As a full long-term developmental guy, 2-3 years down the line, let's see what this guy has. Also, if DJ Glade doesn't work at right tackle, I think within a year or 2, Poole could step in. And I would argue, right, based off the college tape that I had seen, I think Poole's college tape would be better than DJ Glaze's. Now, Glaze obviously played at a much better, I would say much better competition, at least in his senior season, than what we saw with Poole, in my opinion. But Poole has really, really good movement. He's tall, he's long, he's lengthy. And we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening, right? If DJ Glaze doesn't work out at right tackle, he moves to right guard. I think Glaze would be a really, really good right guard. I think guard, generally speaking, tackle to guard is always a good transition for guys. LeJontay Wester gives you an X that can develop. He's not going to be your X day one, and we don't get a wide receiver, right, at this point. If you don't take a wide receiver in the top 2 rounds, there's no point in taking one in the 3rd or 4th round. It never works out, man. Go check the numbers out. Trust me, it never works out. Brady Cook, I think, would be a better developmental quarterback than Aiden O'Connell. Aiden O'Connell just doesn't have the movement it takes to be successful in the NFL. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up getting released or traded, right? I would not be surprised. And of course, Raheem Sanders. Let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.